Here we go. Many times we are told when we leave high demand religion, we're threatened with fear that our children are going to have some kind of dysfunctional or kind of low quality life without religion. And when that happens, we start to feel guilty, and it starts to tug on our fear strings, and we get a little bit worried about whether we really can parent on our own without the support of the village of the church. And so it can really affect our self-esteem as a parent and our confidence as a parent. So I wanted to just point a couple of things out for you to help you understand that these are all fallacies, that these aren't anything that you need to be worried about. So some parents, this is interesting, some parents leave the religion because they don't want their children raised under those circumstances. They don't want their kids to ever be burdened with these covenants, these heavy covenants. They don't want their kids to be responsible for saving their family. They don't want their kids to be exposed to worthiness interviews every 6 months, or, there's so much about the doctrine that people really felt dysfunctional in, that they don't want their children anywhere near the religion, and that will cause a problem in a relationship if there's divorce and there's kids and one of the spouses want to be able to raise the kids in the religion. So that's a whole other video. But the other kind of parent is the one who's like, I'm afraid to leave because, the church was such an epic part of my life, and I really enjoyed being a scout or Boy Scout, or I loved young women camp, or I really had a good experience in church and I was taught some very great things. And so now I'm afraid of leaving my kids out of that and not allowing them to have those experiences, those quality of experiences. And it depends on what your experience was in church as to what experience you think your children will have in church. So if you were one of these that really kind of fell in line and you got all the goody brownie points and the superstars on your forehead because you were able to obey and you really fit into the structure of your religion, then your experience is going to be great. Now, if you're one that comes in and you're more curious about sex, the possibility of you coming out as a youth with this high, sex purity claims on our sexuality is not likely. And if you are, one that likes to test the waters in order to prove yourself or to understand the world, you're just going to have a really awkward time in church. You're never really going to fit in there, and there's going to be a lot of shame there. So it all depends on what your experience is and what it was in church as to whether you want your kids to stay there or you're happy to have them leave. So the big question is, how do you raise moral and principled children without motivating them to be good using the 3 things that religion uses? And I call it GOF, the acronym GOF: guilt, obligation, and fear, which all kind of blends into this lovely word of shame. And we live in this heavy shame environment. And so how do you raise your children to be moral and principled without shame and without this guilt, obligation, and fear? So one thing to ask yourself is, are you a good person as an adult because of what was taught to you through guilt, obligation, and fear? Is that your motivator now as an adult? Or are you a good person because you were taught values and principles that you were finding really do get the results that you want in your life? Because I was raised in a family where we were very obedient, we were very principled. My mom took extra courses though on family and parenting. She was very invested in being a good mom, and so she went over and beyond what an average church member would study as far as parenting. And so she taught us hard work, diligence. She taught us to be honest. She taught us how to tell the truth. I guess that's the same as being honest. But she just taught us to be very friendly in the world and to accept people for who they are. And that was my parents' personality, and that was the life that they lived, and those were the standards that they lived by. So you can take another family who's raised in the same religion, with the same scriptures, with the same follow the prophet attitude, with the same songs sung in primary, And if that family doesn't have the same principled outlook or make the effort in raising that family, then that family is not going to have those principles. You see, there's very few times I ever learned as a mother of 5 children that I ever went to a parenting course. My parenting advice in my career in the church of 45 years was to read the scriptures, say your prayers, and attend your meetings. Make sure your children knew the For Strength of Youth pamphlet backwards and forward, and true to the faith. And it was so much indoctrination. And if you had family home evening, then your children would never leave the church. If you read your scriptures every day, your children won't go astray, because your biggest fear is that your children will go astray and you will lose them in the next life. And that is a major manipulation in and of itself. And so the question comes, are you a good person as an adult? Because of fear, obligation, and guilt, are you a good person because your values and your principles? It's a fallacy to say that religious children are more principled, or that their values can only be taught through the influence of religion. So a child who is motivated by values and by love is more deeply trained and less likely to veer from those values and away from those values than one who is taught through guilt, obligation, and shame. Because a person taught through guilt, obligation, and shame about forbidden things, their curiosity is going to go to those things, and they actually start to play out, and they have a shadow side that they keep secrets from. So an example of this is like when I was in high school, I had friends who were going on missions and are supposed to be going on missions. They were on track for missions, and they came from very popular families within the church. And they were going around having sex, they were making out, they were doing drugs, they were drinking alcohol, they were doing all the no's for an LDS child, but yet somehow they were qualified to get on their mission and go on their mission. And these were the same people that came home, and as they continued to fool the system, and as they continued to set themselves up as a light, then they move into situations where now they're a bishop, or now they're a stake president, and now they're thriving under these conditions. But they really didn't live a life that was super conducive to what the church was trying to teach them through guilt, fear, and obligation. So this happened to my son too when he was on his mission. One of the things that really didn't want, he came home because he had back surgery, and he did not want to go back out, because it really created a lot of friction in his mind when he was confronted with these young men who had done all kinds of things with girls that would disqualify them to reach the expectations of a missionary. But then they would brag about it, and then they would go teach some other people about the importance of chastity and how they needed to live under the covenant before they could baptize them. And it just felt so incongruent for him. He was like, I don't want to live in that lack of integrity, and I don't want to teach something that I know is not being, that I know the person teaching it is not living themselves. I won't live like that. And as a mom, I was like, yes, I've taught my child to live in integrity. Just because you live in the environment of in a church environment does not mean your child is going to learn to be honest. Many times they learn to be dishonest, because being dishonest keeps them from getting in trouble. And being dishonest and not telling the truth and hiding things and censoring things makes their life a lot happier. And so they learn to lie. And that's what happens in a house full of rules, is you make more opportunity to break the rules and more opportunity to censor yourself and to try not to get in trouble. And so that was kind of my son's experience. But my daughters in high school recently, as they're leaving, they were really honest about some of their friends. And again, their friends are out drinking, and they're having sex, and they're doing things that they know are not in alignment with church, but yet they're rising up the church ladder, like they're now Laurel presidents, and they're now speaking at the seminary graduation, and they're doing all these things. But my kids know what's going on in the background, but they've been able to somehow convince their leaders that they're worthy and they're good and that they're virtuous and that they're qualified for all these accolades within the church. And so it doesn't really, when you think about it, it's a fallacy to think that religion is what's going to keep your child a principled person and someone who is going to live up to your values. Because many times we just allow the church to impose on our family, to impose their values on us. The expectation for us as parents to make sure that they know the strength for youth when we ourselves have not approved it for our own inspection. We haven't even looked at it. Oh, as long as you live by the church standards, everything will be okay. Well, do you realize that in the for strength for youth, they're teaching them that every tattoo is a mistake, and that's what they need to see it as a mistake. And so now they're looking out on other people and seeing all the tattoos in the world as times people have made mistakes. And it's giving them a very slanted view about people and an instant criticism and a judgment. And those criticisms and judgments don't allow them to love unconditionally. Those criticisms and judgments are the filter in which they see the world, in which they see other people. And so when they're taught how to think about tattoos, how to think about alcohol, how to think about premarital sex, they're imposing that film onto everybody else, and they're positioning them as super righteous if they can live it. And when they can't live it, they position themselves as unworthy, but I have to hide it. I don't know about you, but that is not healthy psychology. That is not healthy parenting. So let's see what else I had here. One of the things in the Strength for Youth, which was called propaganda, by the way, is it's a terrible guide for teaching children the complexities of their sexuality. It just teaches them to avoid it and abstain from sex, and that, you know, it is a grave sin for you to participate in sex before marriage. That is your education on your sexuality. And that, for such a big part of us as human beings, as sexual beings, that is a grand disservice to our youth who are at the pinnacle sometimes of their sexuality, and they want to explore, and they don't know what to do with some of these feelings, and they don't know who to turn to, because you have this rigid guideline there where they feel that it's not safe to talking to anybody about these thoughts that aren't cohesive with what the religion is. And so they shove it down, they hide it, or they act out, or they talk to somebody who doesn't know or doesn't have your same values. And so the Strength for Youth also teaches them about alcohol in a way that is not true, in a way that doesn't, if they do end up experimenting with alcohol, they're going to get in some serious trouble as far as, you know, being drunk or understanding how to mix the drinks, or even coming to the parent when they have had an experience with alcohol. It keeps the parent and the child very distanced, and a big wedge between their communication when the child doesn't feel safe to differentiate with the parents' values. And so it creates a big wedge in their relationship, and that intimacy is lost, and that child is looking for directions that are more complex and more detailed than what the Strength for Youth pamphlet can offer. This has to do also with their apparel, how, you know, women have been taught for years that if they don't dress appropriately, that they become pornography for men. And I can't think of a more insidious way to teach women that it is their responsibility to guard men's thoughts, or that there's something nasty and bad about their body. And there are so many modesty and purity society, psychology things that are coming out today that help us understand that this high sense of religion was not working for us. And there's this old way of guilt, obligation, and shame, is old technology that is really just creating havoc within relationships with parents and their children. So these are topics that should be your values as far as a parent, and how you want them taught in your home, and how you feel about tattoos, and what you would suggest to your child. And I might consider that nothing is forbidden, but that you talk about it freely with them, and that you exchange ideas, and you ask them how they feel about it. Because in that one thing, just asking them how they feel about it and what values they want to put in it, you're making them a partner in their own life, not expecting them to completely abide by your rules, but giving them permission to differentiate. And if there are family rules where if you break it, this will be the consequence. That, I'm not saying dismiss all of that. I'm just saying help them have an idea about the real complexities of these issues, rather than, you know, you're one or two paragraphs in the Strength for Youth that you're supposed to just abide by and obey, and then somehow your child is going to be principled and have high values, but when in reality they're hiding a lot. So go through that manual. If your child is still being raised in the church, go through that manual. Make certain that the values and the reasons that the church gives as behavior guidelines are even reasons that you want your children to be indoctrinated with. You are the parent. That is your child. It's not the property of the church. So here's a question to ask. Are youths between the age of 18 and 20 who go on missions happier and more successful than those who do not, more successful in life than those who do not? And there is no proof that that is reality. We think when our kids are out on missions, they're learning great skills about how to knock on doors and how to get rejected, which I would say in the business world that is definitely something that is going to be useful for them. That they're learning how to live cohesively in a relationship with their roommate or whatever. However, these are skills that can be learned in a month or two. It's not something that needs to have a 2-year expansion while you're recruiting new members for the church. And many times they have kids coming home because they're anxious, they don't know how to deal with their emotions, they were never taught how to live in harmony with somebody with different ideals and values. And so these kids are afraid to come home, and many times they're discouraged and guilted not to come home. And the expectations of the culture are to stay out there, and that you haven't served worthy and well enough until you've completely served your mission in full. And so you have to ask yourself, is a mission really the best step for my child? Are they more happier, more successful in the world if they go on a mission? Did you know that the statistics in the church right now are that 50% of missionaries leave after 5 years after their mission? And there's reasons for that aren't because we're living in a sinful world and they're being deceived. It's because they get on the internet and give themselves permission to study things, many times things that were brought to their attention while they were on their mission, that they were very ill-equipped and uneducated to answer. And they will come home and they ask those questions and give themselves permission to study as an adult the things that they were taught as they were raised. And so 50% are leaving. And I know for my own son, I felt guilty because I had him go for, cultural reasons. I wanted him to go on a mission. I've been thinking this whole life, I can't wait till he's a missionary and he can go and serve the Lord. And this really was a very traumatic point in his life. Something that is going to take years to get over with because of the rejection that he felt by coming home early, and because of the hypocrisy he saw out in the field, and because of all the disparity with all of the poverty in the Honduras area where he went was overwhelming for him. And to think that the church had all this money and were setting up new temples, it just wasn't making sense for him. And so the damage that happened there is a lot of it's irreparable. There are some people that go on their missions and say it was the best 2 years of my life. Now, many of them are trained to say it's the best 2 years of my life. Otherwise, that was your fault because you didn't figure out how to make your mission wonderful. But no, it's not like that for everybody. Many people get very depressed, discouraged, and afraid, and create anxiety that wasn't there before they left. So if you look in the real world, religious children and young adults are not dominating or even steering the moral compass right now. What moves them to make a difference in the world, if it's not obligation and fear and this need to repent and to prove their worthiness? What is guiding those people who are not religiously affiliated to be so invested in humanitarian events and changes in the world? And I will tell you right now, it's because of values and the principles that they learned in their home. And whether your child learned to be a good person because Jesus Christ died for them and that feels like an obligation, or they're trying to be like Jesus to qualify for the next life into a higher kingdom, if that's what's going on, that's one way. There's another way, and that is just teaching them the principles and the values that can be completely secular, and just how to live in the world and how to care and to have compassion for no other reason than because of who you are. And this seems way too simple for people who are really indoctrinated in the church. But the truth is, those that are who are reaching out and who are making a huge difference right now are non-religious. And so that means these strategies of guilt, obligation, and fear are really outdated strategies. And we can learn to live harmonically in the world and make impact in the world without having those religious undertones. And so with that being said, in fact, I heard it said before, this may be too strong, but it was, if you have to have religion to be a good person, then you might not be a good person at all. I thought, well, that is heavy, but the truth is, just because you're religious does not mean that you're a good person. And I know a lot of people who can check all the boxes, who go to the temple, who read their scriptures, who say their prayers, attend every meeting, and they wear the right clothing and the right underwear, and they're never tasted alcohol in their life, and they're really critical, and they're judgmental, they're highly opinionated, and they don't work well in society. So to me, that's more important, that my children are able to function in society and make a difference in the world by being loving and accepting. And there are people who are in religion that can teach their kids that too, but it's not because of the religion, it's because of the parents and what the parents found as priorities in that family's life. So we're taught that our goodness is because of our obedience to prophets, obedience to scriptures. But if this is true, then why are people who don't subscribe to our religion good? Why are there good people in the world who don't believe the same things that we believe? Who are making grand impact and doing great things without the same beliefs that we are? This doesn't fly. It doesn't make any sense. But here's the thing, a lot of parents question about, what about the activities? What about the scouting? What about the activities days, girls? Now, if you understand high demand religion, that is the time in their life where they are very much in their formidable years, where their brain is pliable, that they're very much influenced. So as a parent, if I had it to do all over again with my 5 children, I would be a lot more cognizant of the people that I have influencing my children and what they're saying. I know for me, I didn't learn anything about sex. My parents did not talk about sex, never gave me the sex talk. And when I was 12 and had my first interview with my bishop, he was asking me questions like if I masturbated or if I practiced sodomy or bestiality or just these things that a 12-year-old, I didn't know what they were, and he had to tell me. And, but my parents never asked me, what did the bishop teach you about sex? They just trusted that he's the bishop and he would never lead my child astray. So we'll give our child to him to teach his ideals and principles about sex. So my mom was kind of a little disturbed when she found that out. She had no idea that that's what I learned. I learned about those things from my bishop interviews. So you will have the challenge if you're keeping your kids in for, maybe for relationship reasons and because, they have one parent that's insisting, that it will be your challenge of unindoctrinating them and to ask them questions, which as parents we should be doing anyway. How do you feel about this principle? How do you feel about, abortion? Let's talk about it. We're not going to tell you how to agree with us and teach you how to agree with us. We're going to explore it, and we're going to study it, and we're going to get educated about it. We're going to get educated about our sexuality and how it affects other people and how to wait for consent and how, it affects your life and relationships. We're going to talk about those things. I never had those conversations with my parents. It was no sex before marriage, no alcohol. And so I was very ill-equipped. I was very underdeveloped in the world. So I'm going to let you know that one of the ways that you can be a fabulous parent is just look up the 5 top parenting books on Amazon. And you get to sift through them. And you as a parent get to choose what's right for you and what feels right for you. And you get to be the sovereign parent in your family. And you get to have that authority with your children until they get to a certain age, and you want them to be the authority of their own life by doing that, you are going to be a far better parent than if you're making sure your kids are sitting in the pews at church every day and are abiding by the covenant path that the church has set for you. Because you're going to learn about setting boundaries, about emotional communication. You're going to learn about how to process emotions. You're going to learn about different parenting styles and pick the one that works for you. And that is going to do far more for you as a parent and your effectiveness in having influence over your children than just making sure that they keep church and their church attendance up. So you, as a parent, want to be the main influence in your child's life. You don't get to control that, but you can have an open and free communication with your kids so that they feel safe talking about things with you, where they feel safe to differentiate from you and to disagree with you. And so you want to be that main influence in your child's life. And what that requires is for you to be present with them and for you to get off your phone and to ask them to get off their phone and to, participate in some deep conversations and help them know how you feel and what you think and what's going on in your mind, and letting them know none of it's set in stone, that you're still in a pathway of learning and growth yourself, but these are some of the things that you've learned and how do they feel about it, and let's talk about it, and what are your thoughts about it. You don't have to agree with me. I just want to know what you think, because you're fascinating and I want to trust you can lead your life and that you can be everything that you've wanted to be. And I love your mind and everything that you think. And so let's talk. This helps the child to be a participant in the relationship instead of just where the parents' indoctrination is always being imposed on them, and where they feel like their job is to make the parent happy. So these are just some of the things I would like to teach, but I have like 2 more pages here that I think I'm going to do a part 2 on, because this video is already super long. If this has been helpful for you and you're going through this faith transition and you have some of these problems, check out the links that I'll be adding below. You can set up a session with me. I have online courses. I have a Kindle book. I have all kinds of resources for you to get connected, including joining my Facebook support group, which is Thriving After Mormonism. So if that's something that you're interested in, please connect with me. I want to be able to support you on this journey. So keep abreast or look for number 2 in this video series of Parenting Without Religion. Bye.